There is so much discontent in this country. And what is discontent? When we are not happy with what we have. We know that there's so much discontent, not just because our politicians say it. We also have the marketing design or the marketing, the advertising world telling us that we should not be happy with what we have and we should go for something which is better. And by the way, here we go. Here's the new model of this and the new product like this. Advertisers cannot be content unless you buy a new car, unless you buy a new computer. I remember when the computer came out, and if I start telling you when that is, I'm sure I'm dating myself. Our young people woke up from their mother's wombs. When they came out, there's already a computer. But for some of us, we grew up without a computer, and then the computer came along. We grew up without Word. We grew up with a typewriter. Some of us were writing it on paper. And maybe there's some here who are writing it in rocks or stones. I don't know. But I won't going to say who you are. But, you grew up, you come out when the computers started coming out. And the computers before were like this big and so heavy. That the life of the computer is, probably 2 years. After 2 years, you probably need to buy a new computer. As you grew up and as time went along, that year or that time of the life of the computer, and that's what they call it, the life of the computer shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And nowadays, you buy something this month, you should be ready to buy another one if you really want to be on top of things and your computer cannot be upgraded. You should be ready to buy something else in 3-4 months. Used to be 6 months, now 3 or 4 months. Apple, the wonderful company that many of us either idolize or we buy their products, used to have a phone that comes out every year. Now it's like they're new products every 6 months. And so the advertisers cannot be content. Manufacturers are not content unless you buy a new computer, a new car, or even a new home. There is now a huge blur between my needs and my wants and my necessities and my luxuries. And the advertising motto in this country is not what we talked about last Sunday, which is the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need, or I shall not want. That is not the motto or the slogan of the advertising community in this world. There's so much progress, and there's so much speed in the way we come up with things but that we are in this thinking that we need so much more. Now, you might hear that from me, and you might not think that way, but I want to challenge you in just your everyday life, in just, you go back to school, let's say, and you have a paper due, and you're looking at your computer, and you're typing along, and some of you will be at the library, and you will look to your left, and you will see your classmate with a brand new computer, and you're going, that's probably faster, that's probably better, I need something like that. And it's a wonder that this progress has caused so much stress, don't you think? It has caused so much stress in our lives. Well, okay, if it doesn't stress you out, it stresses me out. Stresses me out, and I'm sure, he's not here, but I'm sure if he's here, I can tell him that it stresses Rainiel out when there's so much progress and there's something new over there. If technology has made so much advancement in people's lives, then why do so many drink and take drugs? Meaning if there's so much progress, there's got to be a lot of stress, and that is why people go into drinking and go into doing drugs. A couple of weeks ago, you may not know him. Well, you now know him, but we grew up. Those of us who were growing up in the 80s grew up with Prince. And if you notice, this past 5 years, the top 3 popular musicians and artists in the country are dead. And I'm talking about Prince, I'm talking about Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston. I mean, these are 3 hugely popular people growing up in the 80s and 90s. This is the people that we listen to. And just imagine, if you're not in that era, imagine if you're Frank Sinatra era, think of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and someone else dying all in the span of 3 years. That's how big this is. And so this morning, it was funny. I didn't know that my TV was on, but I woke up in the middle of the night, and there's this interview that's going on, and they were interviewing interviewing, and I had to use the bathroom, so I was like looking at the interview, and they were interviewing Lionel Richie. And those of you who may know Lionel Richie, he came from the band called what? Oh, maybe you don't know. Commodores, very good. So Lionel Richie used to be the lead singer of the Commodores, and then he's now on his own. But he's still alive. He hasn't died yet. But one of the things that he was asked is that, what can you say about the death of Prince, the death of Michael Jackson, the death of Whitney Houston? And what can you say to the up-and-coming stars like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift and all these other people? And he said this: if you can get through without the alcohol and the drugs, you'll be fine. And so that's the problem. Because of so much discontent in this nation or in this world, it has caused us a lot of added stress. And so with that stress comes the need for some people to go into drugs and go into alcohol. You look at the lives of Michael Jackson, Prince, and Whitney Houston. These are people who have all the money, who have all the talent, who got all the songs that they can come up with. I mean, they just opened Prince's vault of music that he hasn't even released yet, and that would give him so much more money. I was thinking when he died, all these cities painted or turned on their lights into purple because he's known as the purple. That's his favorite color. So everything was purple, and I was sitting there looking at these pictures, and I'm going, how sad that Prince never got to see this. That he never got to see how much people were going to honor him. It happens when you die, and how sad is that? That he's got all the accolades, all the talent, and all the money, and yet he has given himself so much stress that he had to do drugs and all that, and that he had to die for it. Why are we? If there is so much progress in our lives, if there is so much more money that we have, people are saying that we are earning more and having more stuff, why are we divorcing more and suing each other more? Why are people killing themselves? And why are people killing each other? 40 years ago, school children were being disciplined for talking, right? For chewing gum, for making noise, and running in the halls. That's where I grew up with. That time, I'm not going. Obviously, that tells you how old I am. The biggest problem today is not chewing gum, it's not talking to each other, it's not running up and down the halls. The biggest problems today are guns in school. It's date rape, assault, vandalism, drug abuse. 80 years ago, we had no national debt. Imagine that. 80 years ago, we had no national debt. Today, if you've been to Washington, D.C., in the Bureau of Budget and Operations, I forgot the name of the agency, but they have like a silent radio that ticks up and down, how much money that we owe. And right now, and more, we now have multi-trillion-dollar debt as a nation. 100 years ago, we had fresh air and clean lakes. Today, our forests are being threatened by many things. All the progress through the years seems to do nothing but bring on more stress to us. And in all this stress, simply, bottom line is, we are not finding contentment. We are not finding contentment. And then after I tell you all those bad things, all the bad news, I want you all to look at the good news. I want you to turn to Philippians chapter 4. Some of you have this chapter highlighted 100 times because this is your favorite chapter in the writings of Paul. But Philippians chapter 4, starting from verse 10. You all know I'm going to start from verse 10. Verse 10 starts like this. If you don't have your Bibles, you can look up and look at it. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. This is Paul speaking. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need. For I have learned to be what? Content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether we well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And your favorite verse, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Did the Apostle Paul write about contentment from a comfortable living room? Was he watching ESPN while he was writing this? No, he was actually in a dark, damp prison cell when he was saying something like this. And I challenge every single one of us to actually do this, to actually say, I am content. In the middle, not like you're going to be in prison, unless you will be in prison, or I'll go visit you. But, if you happen to be in prison or you happen to be in a place where you just feel all the stress and all the weight of the world coming on you, I challenge myself and I challenge you to actually say, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Paul had found the key to contentment that is not linked to physical or material comfort. He doesn't need to be in a nice couch from IKEA in order to say this. He doesn't need to be in a nice townhome in the hills in order to say this. He doesn't have to be in a nice, plushy seat, the kind of seats that we are now sitting on, to actually see and say and find the key to contentment. And it was never linked to physical or material comfort. What then is the secret that Paul is talking about to contented life? From verses 11 to 12, he's saying, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. A life of contentment is committed to marginal living. What does that mean? When somebody tell you, marginal living, to have margin in your life is to have reserves. So every time you are looking at even if you look at our bulletin, and those of you who are in school, and those of you who remember what it is to be in school, and you never type your papers on rocks or stones, but if you were typing it on paper, there's always something called margins. And what is the reason for margins? Just because you want to not use the side? No. Margins gives you the ability to read it better. Margins give you the ability to be satisfied or to be content with what you're reading. Try reading something without margins, and I'm going to guarantee you that you're going to be tired and you're going to be stressed out reading it, and you never know that. But obviously, if you put margins, and the margins are there to give you some sort of comfort. And so to have margin in your life is to have reserves beyond what you need. Paul is saying, whenever I'm having days of plenty, I have margins, I have learned to appreciate it and keep it that way. So sometimes you may ask, what is a margin? And as I said, we are used to margins in reading. Without a margin, a page is harder to read. Our modern lifestyle eat up our margins, eat up this comfort that we have. Our modern lifestyles make sure that we put something in the margins. And so by the time we look at our lives, we're going, wow. And that is why when we come into Crown Financial Study, when we start doing that in the next couple of weeks, you will be amazed. A lot of people always say, Pastor Jay, I don't think I should be in that study because I don't have money. I want to challenge you that it's not the Crown Financial Study and what the Lord talks about in the Word of God doesn't just talk to people who have money or people who have lots of it and people who have medium size of it. I'm going to challenge you because we've been teaching this in the prisons. Do you know how much money prisoners earn per hour? 30 cents, sometimes lower than that. Who here is being paid 30 cents an hour? Okay, mother, don't talk about your SSI or something like that. But who among you are being paid 30 cents an hour? No one. No one. In the county of LA, they're about to raise the minimum wage to $15. That's double from the first time I worked in this country. That's already double the amount of the minimum wage. And so we have a lot. And so when the inmates would come to our classes, they would go, well, Jay, really? 30 cents? What am I going to budget? What am I going to talk about? The Lord is not saying in His Word that only people who earn something get to talk about what money is according to the Word of God. No. Biblical financial study means whatever you have and any potential you may have. It also talks about things that we don't like to talk about. Debt, savings, strengthening our marriages, devoting more time. I don't know, maybe some of us don't like the sound of debt, don't want to talk about that. But I encourage you to be, I'm like diverting from my sermon, but I encourage you to be in that study. But, going back to having nothing without even a margin. For example, if you are homeless, we have margins in this society. If you are homeless in this society, you can find a shelter. If you are penniless, you can get food stamps in this country, in this society. If you are breathless, you can get to Medicare and get your tank of oxygen. But if you are marginless, if you have no margins at all, you stuff one more thing into your list that you cannot take care of. For example, you have to go to work this afternoon, but no one's going to take care of your children. Margin is, grandma's here to take care of your children. Marginless means it's being asked to carry a load of 5 pounds, heavier than what you can lift. Margin is, a friend is coming to help you move that. Marginless is not having time to finish the book you're supposed to be reading because you're stressed out. Margin is having time to read it twice. That's what margin is. Marginless is so much fatigue. So much fatigue. I remember my doctor calling me last week and said, "Do you have fatigue?" I go, "Who doesn't?" Really? Are there people without fatigue? I think everyone experiences fatigue. But marginless is fatigue. Having margin in our lives is having extra energy and not so much fatigue. Living with margin comes when we live our lives in a balance. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about. I have learned the secret of contentment because I know it. I know it when I have something, and I know it when I have nothing, which means what? I balance it. I have this great balance in my life. The early church grew by having spiritual disciplines in balance. In Acts 2:42, it says there, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, but not only that, they also devoted themselves to fellowship, to having a time for each other, to the breaking of bread. It's not like they didn't eat, or it's not like they ate all the time, but they had a balance of devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Acts 2:47 says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Because they kept a balanced life. Not 100% doing this or 100% doing that, by keeping a balance of teaching, fellowship, breaking of bread, and of course, prayer. And what is the result of that? Growth. Growth. Added to their numbers. Contentment comes when we have balance in our lives. 40 to 50 hours of work a week. And some of you are going to get hit by this numbers. 40 to 50 hours of work a week leaves us 118 hours of opportunity to be a blessing to our family and others. If you work 40 to 50 hours, if you work more than that, you need to find balance in your life. If you work 40 to 50 hours a week, that leaves us 118 hours, more hours, an opportunity to be a blessing to our family and others. Most people need 7 to 8 hours of sleep to function at their best. By careful budgeting and buying what we need, not what we want, gives us margin for our finances, gives us margin for our sleep. Living our lives in balance results in a life of contentment. In the life of the church, it's added numbers. In the life of Paul, gave him contentment. That's the secret of being content. Committed to a simple lifestyle also gives us contentment. Look at verse 10, when Paul said, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. Paul did not send a letter filled with thank you, but I need more. He says thank you, but I don't really need it because I am content. In Luke 12, when we go into the life of Jesus and you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus rebukes a rich landowner. The landowner harvested bumper crops so much that he had to build what? Bigger barns so he can store his treasure for years to come. Now with financial security, he was really worry-free. But look at the imbalance that he has in his life. And God's judgment was quick. God called the man a fool. What, for saving that? For not having a balanced lifestyle, and that night, as according to the word, that night the man's life was taken from him. Watch out, Jesus warned us. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Tragically, for many people, all they have are their possessions. Some of us in this room, tragically, are living lives in a way that all we have are our possessions. Jesus told a parable of two sons, and the younger son asked his father for his inheritance. And you all know the story. The younger son asked his father, "Can I have my inheritance now, father?" And he was not content to wait for his share of his family's estate. He's not wait. He's gonna wait. He's not gonna wait until his father dies. No, I want my inheritance now. And what he did is that he took what was his share and spent it all in rebellious and riotous living. And he spent all his money. Look at the imbalance that's going on. He spent all his money and ended up in a pig pen. Ended up in where the pigs are living. And his discontent led to poverty. He was so discontent with what he has that actually led him to poverty. Solomon, the richest man in the world during his day, was not content, but he desired more and more pleasures of the world. And he ended up living a life of misery and calling all that he had as being what? If you guys have read the writings of Solomon, meaningless. This is all meaningless. The Apostle Paul found the secret to contentment. He was satisfied with what God has provided. In all these situations, Paul could say, "I have learned to be content." Finally, the secret to contentment is found in our dependence on God. It's not just on balanced living, but actually depending on God. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. This is the part when Paul gets proud, but the right kind of pride. He never said, "Don't worry about me. I'll get out of here as soon as I can because I'm going to argue my case and they will see how smart I am." No, he said, "I can do all, but not because of what I have done, because of what I know, what I've earned, or what diplomas I have on the wall. I can do everything because Christ does it for me." And so if you board members are listening to me right now, you're going to be talking about the building. You're going to be talking about the building of this church. And you're going to decide what we are to do. I want you to remember that it is not because of how good you are with numbers. It's not because how good you are with money. It's not because of what we have saved. It's what the Lord has given us, and through His strength, He will give you a building. Through His strength, He will provide for us. I can do everything. You can do everything because Christ does it for us. So in essence, I have nothing, it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me. When we start feeling too self-sufficient, watch out. When we start feeling, I have so much in my barn, watch out. When we start feeling too much that we have, contentment is going to be hard to find. Elijah stood up against King Ahab, the most evil of all kings of Israel, and after his first confrontation with Ahab, God said to him, "Elijah, go to the brook Cherith, and I will feed you there." God sent black ravens, scavenger birds, each morning and evening with Elijah's meals. How humiliated. You just stood up before the king, and now you're being fed by black ravens and scavenger birds. All his life, Elijah has been self-sufficient. Now he waited on scavenger birds to deliver him his daily bread. But the only way he can be content is to depend on the Lord no matter what. No matter what. We are very self-sufficient people. We're a very self-sufficient church even. We never like depending on other people, right? But times have come and time will come when we will all have nothing. And we will all be humiliated and we won't know what to do. I remember coming to Southern California for the first time after spending my senior high school in Iowa. And for the first time, I learned 6 very important letters in the Filipino's vocabulary. Those of you who don't speak Tagalog probably will not know what this means. But you know, the letters are TNT and INS. Remember? And I realized we have been, growing up in the Philippines, I had a very self-sufficient family. Both my parents value work and they pride themselves in being able to raise 6 children without having to depend on others. And yet, we were afraid of the INS when we first came to this country because I didn't have the necessary papers. And in essence, we're TNT. Again, if you don't know the names of what those letters stand for, you may not know. Well, you know INS. Some people come to this country armed with a green card, armed with a U.S. citizenship. We are not one of those. I wasn't one of those. All of a sudden, I saw myself, my self-sufficient life going down the drain. and we had to live in full dependence on the Lord. I had to be in full dependence on the Lord. Did we do that all the time? Heavens no. Many times our family went through tears, anxiety, confusion, even regrets. Why did we come to this country? We should just go home. Those of you who never felt the anxiety of using a different social security so you can work. I had to fix my social security just so I can work at McDonald's in Hollywood, to pray that they won't scrutinize their files so that they're not going to find out that I don't have a valid green card. And for those born here, I'm not talking about you, but for those of you who went through all that and probably still going through that, the only way to survive is to be fully dependent on Jesus Christ. To be fully dependent on God, as Paul said. Today I will close, before we go into our communion, with a letter that was written by a wife of a Vietnamese pastor who didn't have a house, who was imprisoned. The pastor was imprisoned and the wife was left to take care of the kids. And I put it on PowerPoint so you can read along with me. And it says here, we have been obliged recently to leave our modest apartment and for over 2 months have been living on a balcony. The rain has been beating down and soaking us. Sometimes in the middle of the night, we were forced to gather our blankets and run and seek refuge in the stairwell. Do you know what I do then? The wife said. I laugh and I praise the Lord because we can still take shelter in the stairwell. I think of how many people are experiencing much worse hardships than I am. Then I remember the words of the Lord. To the poor, O Lord, you are a refuge from the storm, a shadow from the heat. Isaiah 25:4, and I am greatly comforted. Today we are going to celebrate communion. And when we celebrate communion, what we are being asked to do is when we take the bread and take the cup, let it be a reminder of the Lord's suffering on the cross. If you're not a member of this church, or you do not know how to take communion, you don't have to take it. No one is forcing you to do anything. You don't have to be a member of this church to take communion. All you have to realize is why you're taking communion. We take the bread and we take the cup, and these are the symbols of the Lord's death. And we're being asked to take it and celebrate by drinking it. And when we do that, we are reminding ourselves. We're not reminding him. He knows that. We are reminding ourselves of what he has done for us on the cross. And what he has done for us on the cross, that is enough for us to depend on. That he will provide for us. And he will give us the contentment that we sorely need in our lives. Let us pray.